Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Blood, Law, and Rage podcast. Today, it's episode 7, firstly, and I'm with Gideon, the Half Knowing. We are doing this live on stream today in aid of Mermaids UK. So I'm just going to take a second to just explain what Mermaids UK are. They are a charity that supports transgender, non-binary, and gender-diverse children and young people until their 20th birthday, as well as assisting families and professionals involved in their care. During the current political climate and just general climate of the world, I find that this charity is extremely important, and I've seen firsthand the work that they've done, and it is fantastic. So, if you are around at any point within this next week, obviously the podcast will be coming out probably Wednesday the 7th. I will be streaming up until Saturday the 10th in aid of Mermaids. So please do pop by. Please do donate if possible. Either way, thank you so much. So let's get into this first by saying hi, Gideon. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
I am.
Uh,
I am doing fantastic. I'm very excited.
I am too. I think it's it's very exciting to be doing something for a trans youth charity. It's Pride Month. I am transgender myself, and I even got my start with hormones at a nonprofit in the States. So very happy to try and give back to the whole situation.
Let's go. That's actually super exciting. Um, so exciting. Proud of you. That's great. So we're gonna just start with the general of as a guest on the podcast. Who are you? What kind of work have you done in Elden Ring, firstly, and what kind of things are you into outside of Elden Ring? So everybody knows.
Yeah, let's do that. It's sort of funny that you ask that question because I am a host of a podcast called Elden Kings, an Elden Ring discussion, where I have people on to my podcast and I ask them that same question every single time, and I get to feel how much it puts you on the spot to be asked it now.
Where do you think I got
um,
it from?
yeah, you gotta take a leaf from my book. So yeah, like I said, I got my start with podcasting for Elden Ring. I played the game when I first played it. I was sort of like an anti-internet offline purist for whatever reason. So I was like, this is a private experience for myself, and you can see where that led to me just being in like I think over 10 different Elden Ring discussion discords, having a podcast. I talked about the lore with so many people on my own podcast that I've started doing my own Elden Ring theories. I do challenge runs too. Like I have an Elden Ring New Game Plus 10 and Rune Level 1 Let's Play where both of them get weirdly into the lore at times. So my general vibe is that I know half of everything and all of nothing. So take everything I say with a grain of salt.
That's another donation for mermaids. Oh,
Key Crew donated $50 via Streamlabs charity.
it's
Let's start
already
off with a
started.
bang, less than 3.
That was $50 from Kikru. Thank you very much. So now that we know who you are, we're going to start getting into the first part of. I was firstly on the Elden Kings podcast myself, which was a fantastic time. And secondly, we did have a couple of conversations about some general stuff, mostly about me because I was a guest on the podcast, boring stuff like that. But specifically, we had a couple of conversations about Elden Ring itself, and I wanted to ask you, since I've had this conversation with you a couple of times, but I wanted to do it on a podcast first of all. What about like Elden Ring, about like philosophy, about life in general? What is on your mind in those spheres right now?
Okay. So that's actually a pretty good question because it's like something that's always drawn me to Elden Ring and Soulsborne games as a whole. I feel like is the fact that I really like the depiction of I guess life, if that makes sense. You know, like life and darkness. It's a very Taoist Eastern philosophy modeled thing. And to be honest, I'm sort of like a Neoplatonist if I had to choose any sort of like presiding philosophy or spiritualism to follow, just because I like to think of everything as being connected.
Hmm.
So to like the thing that's always on my mind with Elden Ring is just this consistent awe that they could make a setting that has a mythology that's so densely packed that when you unravel it from the narrative point of view that you experience in game, you can get this sort of like mind elevating story, you know, like the whole quest for the Elden Ring itself is a quest of self-discovery in the same way that like King Arthur's quest for the Holy Grail was a quest for self-discovery, and that's sort of a metaphor for the player themselves playing the game and then sort of like
Wow.
growing as a
That was a
person from what they
donation from Bernie.
experience, which can be seen like
Glossy
that
Buckthorn
that can
donated
come from any
$20 via
interaction with
Streamlabs
art, I feel
charity.
like.
Good cause. Best of luck, Rage and Gideon.
Fantastic. I'm gonna be honest, I got a little bit distracted there at the end because Glossy just donated another 20, so I'm having a bit of a meltdown.
Ooh, let's go! Kikru and Glossy helping us out. $50, $20. They're already almost to 100. It's very exciting.
Oh my god, it's terrifying. It's fantastic. Just to clarify, also for all of those who are watching in later or or currently, I have a setup where I will be doing a bunch of different things as people donate. And the $150 goal, I'm going to be shaving my head bald. Just to clarify that that's going to be a thing. So back to the point at hand. I think Elden Ring itself is like very fascinating in the way of like how it connects to lots of things in life, lots of philosophy, and also like you mentioned very specifically like King Arthur mythology and all of that. I find myself very interested by King Arthur and that mythology very, very deeply. So is there any like particular way you think that that connects to Elden Ring that you've like noticed, or anything similar?
Oh man, like 1000%. The easiest example is that Godfrey is the Lord of the Round Table hold. Like he's literally got a he's, you know, like the King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, Godfrey's Round Table hold. The similarities are very apparent from the get-go, and I feel uh like that's like the like sort of eye-catching just name version of it, but like I feel like there's just a lot of like the entire medieval aesthetic, the Western fantasy that uh you know From Software tries to capture with their games. I feel like that's very inspired from the fantasies that people were telling themselves about King Arthur. Like King Arthur as a character concept that we hear about was propaganda 1,000 years ago, back when Wales was being slowly destroyed and its borders were being encroached on by, you know, Wessex or like Scotland or the like the Scandinavians. So and I'm no historian, so I like, you know, again, take what I say with a grain of salt. There's more to what I'm saying here than the basics, and I'm probably like I'm exaggerate. I'm very broadly talking about like 500 years of history, but like, yeah, King Arthur was propaganda even back when he was being written about, and I guess it's just like this idea of the High King who saves the land and rules everything and is just good and prosperous. That, you know, we see it in Lord of the Rings, we see it in a lot of fantasy. I feel like that's defined by King Arthur, and that From Software is sort of picking up the end of a trail of Western fantasy being developed across, you know, hundreds of years of culture, which is interesting to me.
100%. I've been doing a lot of research into like Lord of the Rings and like those sort of mythologies as well, and how they connect, and the connections are so many at this point that it's kind of like, where are the connections not, almost. But one of the things that like also on the same trend that really I find interesting, well, talking about like, so when you say like Gideon in the Round Table, did you mean Gideon or Godfrey? Because I
Oh, I meant Godfrey as the Lord of the
Godfrey.
Round Table.
Yeah.
Did I say Gideon? Oh
No,
my
no, you said
goodness.
Godfrey. I was just like double checking. So
Okay.
I find that like super interesting, especially considering the like the aspects of Godfrey being this kind of atypical English, like, well, I say English, sorry, British like lord, where he is the first Elden Lord, right? But on top of that, rather than using like a sword like you'd expect him to, or something similar like a sword and shield, or the classic like knightly archetype, instead of that, like he uses an axe. And he uses a lot more of like his music has got very Celtic influences. The Celts used throwing axes, which he throws his axe. I very much so doubt Celts used big battle axes to throw for the most part, but hey, if somebody wants to prove me wrong, please prove me wrong. That sounds fantastic. But I find it really fascinating that you've got all of that going on, like from these like inspirations from different mythologies in the British Isles. Firstly,
In Merlin from being a mentor figure to a comrade, because I think that if we were to draw an allusion to Elden Ring with it, which I think we can, because I think Merlin translates somewhat well as Gideon, the all-knowing. You know, both of them have a sort of wise in the shadows figure going. They both seek knowledge above the pursuit of power. You know, Merlin doesn't care so much about ruling the land, but he cares about ensuring that there is a ruler to the land, because he understands like the sort of stoicist way of like knowing that all things are connected and whatever. So I guess that's just like, you know, I do think that there's a connection with Merlin. And then there's also an arguable connection with the Lady of the Lake as well, because it's like, this one's a lot more nebulous, but like Rhea Lucaria could arguably be called Avalon. Avalon being the sort of but at the same time, I do think that I don't know. That was a tangent. My apologies. But where I'm going with it is that either Renala or Marika could make good Lady of the Lakes. Renala, on account of her owning Raya Lucaria and leading this sort of mist-laden lake, and the fact that she is in some ways a foil to Marika. And then Marika, in the sense that Marika, as the goddess, chooses the Elden Lord. You know, she has power over the Elden Lord in a way that they can't achieve power over themselves or the land. So, in the way that the Lady of the Lake chooses Arthur, Marika, in a way, chose Godfrey. And I know that at the end of Elden Ring, she's a husk and she can't choose anyone. It's just she's left with whoever can fight their way there. But so you see how the not illusion, but like translation isn't one to one. But I feel like there's an argument for like that kind of existence, if that makes sense.
Of course. That's very interesting. I kind of feel like part of me wants to say that Rani has connections to like being the Lady of the Lake, but if we like mostly just because giving somebody like a sword, right? That kind of feels like it. And if the lake's frozen over, you know, it's not really like this the same, but you get the idea, right? But at the same time, I don't necessarily fully believe that that's going to be the case. So you mentioned stoicism, right? And I wanted to know specifically, like, where do you think the influences of stoicism really have affected Elden Ring?
Okay, yeah, I can. Before I get into that, I just want to say that I actually do really like your idea with Rani, just because she, at the culmination of her quest, when she recognizes the character's right to lordship under her own order, she does bequeath them a sword, you know? So I feel like the Lady of the Lake, I mean, there's definitely a through line there that we can argue for logically. But stoicism-wise, it's funny that you ask that, because we talked a little bit before the stream, where you were like, hey, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, I've been writing this 40,000-word blog post about the armed forces of Elden Ring. And in that blog post, while I'm talking about the Knights of the Cuckoo, I get really, really deeply into stoicism from the point of view of Rhea Lucaria. Because one of the most important parts of Stoicism, from the point of view of as it developed from the end of Greece into like the beginning of feudalism, from what I know of, is that like and I mean, like, this was going on in Greece too, but like they had a very strong focus on the stars, because part of the whole idea of Stoicism is that you cannot avoid fate, so you should accept it, and that fate is the divine will of the universe. So understanding the divine will of the universe and being able to accept your lot in life and follow fate in that way, you will it's just the best. Like, Stoicism preaches that that's the best way to live. So for Rayo Lucaria, so for the Stoicism, bleh. Okay,
All right.
resetting. The way that you read the divine will of the universe in Stoicism is by observing the signs of the world around you, which is a very realistic thing that all humans experience. Like, oh, you see gas prices go up, there's an election going on. Like, those are two interconnected concepts that are very, like, you have to understand the world to understand what's going on. And Stoicism takes that and it makes it into a spirituality, because it understands the connections, but then it makes it, because all humans need a spiritual backdrop to their existence. So because of that, they sort of extrapolate that the stars, as the greatest physical indicators of existence, are the best way to read into the divine will of the world. So obviously, like, the stars are giant astronomic entities that don't interact with Earth, so that's just, like, wrong. But it's where we get astrology. It's where we get the belief that we can have star signs affect our personalities. And I'm going. I took a long time to spin around to this, but Rayo Lucaria, with the fact that they believe astrology is the way to read their fate in the stars, there's a very interlinked idea going on there, in my opinion.
I agree 100%, and I even had like a conversation with one of the other people who have been on the podcast, Kage, about this. We talked about how like star signs specifically could be connected between Elden Ring, like different characters and who the characters would be, and like all of that. Especially coming down to Fucus. Again, I still can't remember how to exactly say it. Being the Elden beast, how it was like a snake sort of like star sign that has kind of been like taken out of like general population's thoughts, right? But it being there, and like all of the connections between all of those things. So the philosophy of Stoicism itself, I understand, like, of course, like the broader strokes of it. Do you think it applies just in general to like Elden Ring, with like obviously the star signs and like the larger things, or do you think it? How do you think the philosophy of it really connects to any of the actual characters in the game? And if it does, is there any like characters who it applies to more or less specifically, who you think might like embody it almost? And do you think that any of them, like, do you think it's like refuted or accepted, or is the connection to Stoicism very like difficult to like gauge, I suppose?
Okay. Geez, I could approach that question from so many different angles. So yeah, basically, what I found most interesting while I was doing research into it is that it would look like you have these broader entities of Rayo Lucaria and the Golden Order, and then eventually Golden Order fundamentalism. And all of those existences, all of these like entities, these structures, institutions, they're represented in microcosm by an individual character who represents the sort of progression of the overall events with their own internal journey. That's like a narrative storytelling concept that's used in a lot of stories. Dune, my favorite book series that I never stop talking about, does it all the time. Like, you don't have characters that are just characters for the sake of being people. You've got characters for representing something. So, in my opinion, what Elden Ring does is that, Rayo Lucaria is represented by Rani and Renala. The Golden Order is represented through Marika's internal struggle, and the way that her children then represent the Golden Order splitting apart with the different ideologies that come out of existence under it for so long that civil war erupts. And if you follow that line of thinking, then we can get into your question of how, you were asking how Stoicism interacted with the rest of the game and its characters, is how it sounded. Yeah. So essentially it's like, oh man, okay. I've been sitting on this one for a bit ever since I started writing about it, but it's like, in my opinion, if Raya Lucaria can be Stoicism, which is sort of a monist point of view, with monism being a way of dividing the world into different sort of existences. Like, for people that believe that the spirit exists intangibly and is connected to the body through some sort of metaphysical way, that's a dualist point of view where you believe your soul is separate from your body. With Stoicism being a monist point of view. And if they didn't understand back then that your brain was the product of your intelligent thought, they still believed that your body was like the structure of your being in a way. Even if they But what's interesting about that is that even though they could have that belief, that your body made up the structure of your body, of your thought, they would go on to they'd go on to form so many philosophical debates about how that operated. Where it's like, okay, I guess I'll just get into if you don't mind me going on a long tangent to explain the mind-body problem. I feel like it could help give some context into where I'm going with the way that the philosophy is interplay. If you want to get into that, though, I could just finish out with Ronnie and Marika, which is like the end point of this, in my opinion.
I'm more than happy for you to go well deep in.
Okay. So in my thoughts, it's essentially you have the mind-body problem in real life, which is that ancient humans believed that the soul was separate from the body. They believed that the body, because they could see animals, was an unthinking concept, and that the humans had some sort of special connection with a mind that would then grant them intelligent thought. If you look at Dark Souls, we're already seeing parallels, because the whole idea of the soul granting clarity to the body and allowing civilization to happen is very much, like, the body is dumb, the soul is smart. The soul gives clarity. But as time progresses, we have a greater understanding of science, and with that comes an understanding of the human brain. And it essentially, when we get into sort of Renaissance era views on the mind-body problem, they sort of get into this argument called the argument of causal interaction, where, because people were talking and saying that the soul was what led the body, some people started saying, well, how can you tangibly prove that the soul is affecting the body? Like, where in the physical processes of the body does it connect to the soul and be influenced by it? And if you can't prove that, then you can't empirically prove, the entire idea. Because we're not quite at the scientific method, but we are getting a bigger focus on empirical evidence. So from there, we get sort of 4 broad views of reality. You can stick with the dualism, the mind-body, they are separate. In my opinion, Elden Ring begins with this dualism, where you have the mind-body as separate under the prehistory. But then, as you translate into the Golden Order's history, it progresses in the same way that human thought progressed in terms of the relationship with the philosophy. So you have this idea where Raya Lucaria was one of the very first philosophies where they practiced Stoicism, because they were the astrologers were around during the prehistory. They realized the impact the stars had and how the soul influenced the body, and that became the basis of their understanding of the world. Which, if you look at the refutal to the dualism aspect of the mind-body problem, one of the refutals is the idealism refutal, which is the idea that the mind exists above the body, and that the body follows the path of the mind. So in this way, the Reo-Lucarian scholars would believe that the fate of the stars guides the human soul, which guides the body of Elden Ring people. You following with me so far?
I think I'm following with you so far. Okay. Please
I'm so
continue.
sorry, it's so complex.
It's very complex. I'm almost certainly going to be very confused by the end of this, but that's okay. Continue going. Very big brain.
Okay. So yeah, so you have idealism established. But I mean, like in the current day, we have physicalism because, like, obviously, scientifically, I mean, I don't know. I respect spiritualities, but I am somewhat of a atheist.
Mhm.
Non, I said I was a Neoplatonist in terms of philosophy, and I love spiritualism. I love writing about magic. I even love writing about Christian mythology. It's really fun, in my opinion. But I am a physicalist, so I believe that the matter of the world is what comes first, and that the mind is something that happens after. But what we got out of the Renaissance, because people were very religious, is that we got this idea called neutral monism, which is that the neutral monists believe that that the soul is influencing the body, but that it can't make a tangible connection with the body, but it does so through the help of God, through the help of the divine.
Mhm.
And even if you don't believe in the Christian God, the divine under that philosophy of Stoicism is just the will of the world and fate.
Hmm.
So in this way, you have the Rheolukarian scholars who encounter the dualism mind-body problem of the prehistory as the soul develops, and they start to focus on the stars because they realize that the stars are closely interlinked with the soul, which influences the land of the lands between.
Mhm.
Um, but eventually, the Elden Ring comes, and the Golden Order uh, begins its rise, and they fetter the stars, and they take fate for themselves. And in this way, neutral monism is established, where that divine will comes between the soul and the body. Um, and we see this in microcosm with Ronnie, who is an astrologer who knows the influence of the soul on the body, but she realizes that her body now has the go-between of the greater will, which
Mhm.
is which would seek to control her. So this would explain why she slays her flesh and why her slaying her flesh gets rid of the intermediary effect the greater will has on her.
Mm.
Uh,
'Cause
so she's able to go about her own fate
she
by
has a
just being a
mind.
soul.
Yeah, so she has a mind, but no body to be worried about with the connection. If
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
understanding that. Okay. Fantastic. Wow. Okay. Sorry, please continue. I just needed to like clarify that sorry. Yeah, continue.
That can't, but technically that could be the end of the thought because like that's it in its most like that's the best way I can explain it in like succinct manners. But like if we wanted to get into um there's a really interesting like way to look at it from Marika and Mikola's view because Marika and Mikola oh god, okay, because we interact with this at so many different levels because this is just the point. This is just the Western point of view that Elden Ring has, but
Mm.
it manages to contain other philosophies in itself. Because while the Rheolukarian scholars and the astrologers before them began the idealism view of the world, they began it based off of a dualist world that existed before them that was predicated on a cycle of life and death and like rot like power from rot.
Mhm.
And that philosophy is more like Eastern Buddhism styled, which
Mm.
is what we see with the culmination of Millennia's quest line and the fact that she has a blind swordsman aid her from the land of reeds.
Mhm.
And that is part of the reason, in my opinion, that the Scarlet Rot is so vilified under the Golden Order is because the Golden Order as a philosophy, as like a Western based philosophy, is like the interaction of the two from a real life point of view is incompatible. So the interaction of the two from the fantastical point of view in game is incompatible.
Mm. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned that because, as somebody in the chat has mentioned, Human Justicar, who's also a YouTuber who has been on this podcast before, Life, Death, Rebirth with the Ancestral Followers also. But even on top of that, before the Golden Order, there were the Deathrite Birds with their like cycle of life, death, and the burning of like bodies affected. Well, the burning of souls in order to continue death and the cycle. And I find that like very interesting. This like whole they're like Elden Ring is built upon hundreds of different dualities and the interwovenness of it. But it is one of those things where there are so many different things that they make up this large microcosm of everything under the sun. But at the same time, all of those things can still be split into those small dualities. Like Rot and the Golden Order, but also at the same time, things like Rot and Blood have their own dualities between the two of them as well. And even like Blood and the Golden Order has its like connections and like duality in itself. I find that fascinating, firstly, but also I just like I'm just having a moment of going, wow, this game is insane, and all of the things you have said have made so much sense to the point where I just like I don't even know how to respond almost. Okay, sorry, just I think continue and I will see if I can respond later along the line.
Okay. And like that's what I'm talking about. This game is mind elevating in the literal sense of it where art comes from, where art can be the most profound is in the presentation of a concept that allows people to have multiple viewpoints of it because it itself can represent multiple viewpoints. In my opinion, I like to think of it as like like how when you cut a gem, when you cut a crystal, you are focusing on its refraction points. You're taking if a story is a rough gemstone, then you're taking it and you're polishing it and you're cutting it until it has so many different flat angles that can refract so many different ideas and themes that it just explodes into prisms of light everywhere. That's my personal fun little metaphor for it.
That is
It really is truly incredible,
that
though.
is fantastic. As a metaphor. And I also think the mentioning the whole idea of how art functions as a concept as well, it almost like feeds itself into Elden Ring itself, right? And
Uh,
the way I like see Elden Ring as like a game, right? Is the game itself stands upon its own 2 feet in like very specific ways and very nuanced takes on a lot of things, right? And I do genuinely consider it such a masterpiece. It is my favorite game of all time, joint maybe with Signalis, right? But at the same time, the actual nature of Elden Ring itself isn't everything. Like the gemstone, like it has all of those things. They have like the gemstone itself has all of those places that you need to cut and to shape and everything, but the nature of the way Elden Ring is created as a a piece of art is that it is left up to interpretation. They went through and they, like, as we talked about on the Elden Kings podcast, they went through and they like took parts out that were making things too explicit to allow interpretation for anybody to be able to put their own like thoughts and processes on it, and for people to be allowed to latch onto all of the things that they think are important, right? And just as like an example of this is just this podcast itself. I'm going to be honest. If I hadn't been talking to you today, I would have never have assumed. I would never have figured out or connected Stoicism in the way that you did to Elden Ring itself. But on top of that, I don't think I like there were parts of the whole idea of like potentially the Golden Order and the Rot connecting that I would have had like stored away in my brain, but I never would have reached the level of detail in these specificities that you did, right? And that is the beauty of this game and art as a whole. Because art isn't just the person who makes it. Art is also the people who read it or look at it or listen to it, and all of their thoughts, their opinions, their life imprinted in a single moment upon this ever glowing crystal with all of the different cuts upon it. And I think that's just beautiful and fascinating.
Absolutely. And all art is a reflection of yourself. And that can make it some of the most profound, that can usually be one of the most profound parts of interacting with it. So,
100%. Oh my god, I love this game so much. So the next thing I wanted to move on to, because as much as I want to just continue talking about Stoicism forever, my brain is just not able to actually put the words together to say what I want to say. So I'm going to wait till a little bit later in the podcast to come back to that, I think. Or maybe, hey, everybody who's watching this either eventually on YouTube or on Twitch right now, because the YouTube stream kind of died. We don't need to worry about that. Tomorrow, I am also going to be on the Elden Kings podcast on this same stream. So that's going to be just be fantastic. And we can maybe talk about it then when I've had a night to store all of that information and rot over it. As such.
digest it.
Yeah. Digest it like one of those dino dogs digested me when I tried to grab the gut sword. So the thing I wanted to move on to for a second is the DLC that is announced, Shadows of the Erd Tree. I wanted to know what your thoughts of what it could be are going to What do you think it's going to be? Firstly, what are you expecting? Are you excited? All that jazz. What are you thinking?
I am incredibly excited. Definitely, the Armored Core 6 and Elden Ring DLC are like the most hyped things on my radar right now. So, as you can see, I'm a big From Software fan. But like, in terms of the DLC content itself, that's like, okay. I've had way too many thoughts over it. I have a 40-minute video on my YouTube channel that is just unhinged in its speculation over the singular image that they released on Twitter. And like it's funny because previously I really expected it going to the past DLC. I thought that Elden Ring's setup with the broad open world worked best for it. But ever since we saw that DLC image, I have been fully on in the camp of that's the afterlife that we're going to. And it's funny, I didn't even think that an Elden Ring afterlife existed before the DLC image dropped. Like, I considered it, and then I was like, well, the way that Destined Death works with its tick down ability seems more like an utterly obliterating force than some sort of transition to an afterlife. So to me, it seemed like the fear of Destined Death being unleashed was that it would leave the entire world lifeless and barren. But maybe now that we have the idea of the afterlife, maybe it's. There's so many fucking things to speculate about, Rage.
So many things.
I talked about the armed forces of Elden Ring. Hopefully that'll actually be out by the end of the week. But in that, I try to break down the Mausoleum soldiers. And the Mausoleum soldiers have Lutel the Headless, who is really weird, really interesting, because she's essentially a spirit ash that is also a Mausoleum Knight. So, for that to function, the spirit ashes can't be the singular resting point of the soul after death. Because if she becomes a headless knight of the Mausoleum faction, her soul has to be at the Mausoleum. But if it can also be summoned at the Spirit Ashes, that implies that in both cases of using the bell in the Rebirthing Monument, or the Walking Mausoleum using its bell to toll the dead, it is drawing something from a different space, which is probably the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
What do we know about the afterlife? Fuck all.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on it? I'm very curious because I've had the afterlife idea subsume my mind. So I'd be interested if you have something that goes in a contrary direction.
I mostly agree. I'm pretty sure. There's just so many different ways that I know that this could still surprise us that I'm somewhat apprehensive to just be like, yes, 100%. But I've had this conversation a couple of different times, right? With Human Justicar and Cosmos, separately, and then a couple of like other people like outside of the podcast as well. So firstly, as anybody who has seen anything that Cosmos has ever put out, we are based and Helfenpilled in this in this podcast.
I love it. I love it.
The Helfen is just the red wispiness of where the like heroes go, effectively. And Helfen Steeple is like the only piece of information we have about it. There's a red light. We can see the Helfen on the path, the Forbidden Lands, on the way to the mountaintops of the giants, right? Just like wispy red grace, effectively. And that's like all we get in the entire game. And it's absolutely crazy that I look over and Cosmos has like a bunch of stuff on it, but also was like, talk to me about a lot of this stuff in the podcast. And there's just so much more to possibly go from even there. And so the Helfen was like one of my... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go. Okay, I was just going to say, like, one of those aspects of where it can go further is that not only is the mountaintop of the giants very, very spirit worldy, as if the verdant life energy has died. You know, if we go back to the dualism idea, the body has died, only the soul remains. But which would explain why we see those wisps of the Helfen potentially. But one not mentioned very often part of the Helfen tree is that the death ritual spear that the Deathrite birds drop, it seems to be modeled after the Helfen itself. I'll link you it, I guess, in our PMs, but I'm not sure how to show it to the viewers. But it's the Death Ritual Spear. It's just, it has the upper Helfen branch aesthetic to it, which is very interesting because it references the Deathrite birds using a practice of sacrificing spirits so that they can revive them from the dead, as if they are sending these spirits to the Helfen with the knowledge that they can bring them back.
That's fantastic. I didn't even think about that. Oh my god! And also the Deathrite birds. Some of the more like strong, like some of the stronger ones have spirits in their wings as well. So it is just a case of.
Yeah. No, you're completely correct on that.
So even then, like, you can continue on with like, maybe those have been to the Helfen potentially, or something different, but they are also just still here in the wings. And like, there's so many ways, like, just from one image, there's so much stuff that we can speculate, but there's so little that we actually know. Like, I'm also firmly on the position of the individual is onto the back of Torrent is Mikla, right? At this point. In my video that I made on it, I was like, it probably is actually Marika, but I've come around and realized that like it just doesn't really make sense for it to be Marika realistically. But it still could be, and that's the crazy thing. But on top of all of this, when I was talking to Human Justicar, we were talking about how like the lands between already could be an afterlife, right? But that doesn't mean it's the only afterlife. And the real world analogy is effectively that, hey, a bunch of different people have a bunch of different reasons, like places that people can go in afterlives, right? But even on top of that, there's, in a lot of places, there's good afterlives, like middling afterlives, and then like bad afterlives, right? And just as an example, let's like use Greek mythology. You've got the Fields of Elysium for if you're a hero. You've got Asphodel for if you're just a generic person. And then you've got Tartarus for if you're the worst of the worst, effectively, right? And all of those afterlives in the same section of afterlives. And so the idea that the lands between is just like an afterlife in the middle, placed just between other sets of afterlives. On top of the fact that it's very Celtic inspired by Turnanog, and I've definitely butchered the pronunciation of that. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's Tirnanog, but whatever. We do our best. But like the idea of it already being an afterlife, and then there being other afterlives connected, and then that one being the shadow of the Erd Tree, the Helfen, or something similar. Oh my god.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, even, like another example that the game uses very frequently is Norse mythology, which has Hel, Asgard, Valhalla, lots of different types of afterlives to be taken to based off of your disposition or your standing in the current society.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, this game. I'm gonna be here for the rest of my life talking about this game, I think, actually. Uh um so with that as like an idea, what is the like craziest DLC thought you have currently of this could still be a possibility, but it's unlikely?
Uh, I mean, do you want to hear the insanely complex ideas I have on why this could specifically be the afterlife? Or do you want me to go with like one of my previous crackpotter theories that I've sort of discarded by now?
I think crackpot theory first, and then we go back to why you think it's the afterlife.
Okay, so back before we even got the DLC image, back before I even was like working on content that I was posting in a well-structured manner, I had a lot of ideas about how, you know, one of my first game was Dark Souls 2, so I'm a little bit biased here, but I very much believe that Elden Ring is Dark Souls 2 the second. It does everything Dark Souls 2 did, but better, more polished, more completed. Even the dichotomy that we talked about earlier with Godfrey and Gideon is used in Vendrick and Aldia. Not to mention that Nishandra and Nerika are very, 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 very similar characters.
Hmm.
To me, at least. Even if a lot of people don't believe that. But one thing that I thought they were going to take from Dark Souls 2 was the Ashen Mist Heart, which you acquire from the Dragon Eyrie. Which, like, the Dragon Eyrie is just Farum Azula. Like, literally, From Software made the Dragon Eyrie, and they were like, fuck it, we can do it better. And then they made the Arc Dragon Shrine or whatever from Dark Souls 3, and they were like, no, we can do it better. And then they made the Fountainhead Palace, and they were like, but guys, what if it was better? And then we ended up with Farum Azula. But really, the entire structure of the Dark Souls 2 endgame of arriving at the capital and having to go to another place to do something, which in like Dark Souls 2's case, you have to go to the crypts to find Vendrick and the King's Ring. In Elden Ring's case, you have to go to the mountaintops to light the Crucible. Or the you can already see my crackpot theories coming through with that.
Yeah.
To light the Forge of the Giants. But with the it's basically once you get to Dragon Eyrie, you get the Ashen Mist Heart, which lets you go back into the past to get the Giant's Kinship. And the Giant's Kinship lets you approach the throne of Dark Souls 2, which is the Kiln of Want, the Throne of Want. All of those are very, very thematically interlinked. The fact that you need the Giant's Kinship to take the throne is vital. And the fact that in Elden Ring, Godfrey repeats Vendrick's mistake of genociding the Giants, and the fact that the Fell God is such a mystery in how it relates to the Frenzied Flame, and how the Frenzied Flame is basically the Chaos Flame from Dark Souls 2, where the idea is that you need strength to contain it. There's so many confluences of ideas that I was just like, what if we went to the past and we got to learn more about the Giants and learn about how the Frenzied Flame interacted with death, and from there we could get some sort of like big metaphysical answers about the universe. I really got crackpot with it, with thinking that we'd get to see the first defense of Lendl. Like there's this ancient dragon knight Kristoff, Ash of War, not Ash of War, but Spirit Ash, and in it mentions that the player character, like it mentions that Kristoff got the honor of the Erdtree burial for defeating Godofroy. And it's in Dark Souls 1 and 2, they have this concept where the player character goes back in time. And they achieve this great exploit, killing Manus, defeating the Giant Lord. But then, because they're anachronistic in history, their deeds are taken by someone else who is then recorded in history, like Artorias in Dark Souls 1. So, I don't know. There were enough similarities in the structure that I was like, what if that's what they're setting up for? It's not. Probably not. But what if?
I mean, time travel, firstly, is just a very FromSoft thing to do. So I don't even particularly like feel like that's out of the blue entirely. It's very possible. But also,
Oh no, go on, finish the thought.
But also, like, I like as somebody who hasn't played Dark Souls 2, I feel like the connections make a lot of sense to me, just as like a baseline from like just hearing it, right? I just, oh my god, that like I feel like that opens up a whole world of possibilities. And I also just had a random thought of realizing that a lot of the theories about Radagon, right, are that he's half giant and stuff like that, or giant born, or he's like a giant who was small and stuff like that. And I
Or
just,
at the very least, cursed by them.
or at least cursed by them. And I just realized that like he's just Thor. Like Thor is a
Yeah,
half
yeah.
giant who massacres his own people under Odin's will. He's a drunkard and this, that, and the other. He has a bunch of children who don't necessarily care too much for him. And then at the end, he like dies to the last breath of Jormungandr. Like they kill each other and then he dies. And if you think about it, if he dies to the last breath of like another snake-like being, the Elden Beast literally turns him into a sword.
Oh yeah. No, I mean that's a fair analogy. Plus it gives like I think the Thor point, even if the Jormungandr Elden Beast connection is iffy,
Mm-hmm.
like the Thor point gives so much context to the golden lightning that Radigan spams that I think that's enough proof on its own.
Oh,
But I
definitely.
really like that connection with the Elden Beast. Like it's speculative. It's more speculative than Radigan, but like it's there. Because the only other option is saying that it's Rykard. Like what if Rykard was able to do it? But never did. But
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense in a way, especially considering the fact that Rykard, if I remember correctly, he was given a piece of Destined Death by Ronnie as well.
yes, so that he
So
could eventually combat the gods, even though he fell to
yeah,
his greed.
exactly. So if Rykard was meant to be the Jormungandr, but then failed to become Yorm, that makes obviously, I don't mean Yorm as in the Dark Souls character, but also um
Giants.
giants. Yorm, he's a giant kin. Loki's his dad.
Yeah, like Renala, in my opinion, is the closest analog to Loki besides Ronnie we can argue for in the game. But Ronnie fits far better as a Hel or Himidor character.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I've been sitting on a lot of these thoughts for quite some time, and I feel like I think I've seen them in bits and bobs in places, but so like the ideas of like Norse gods being connected to Elden Ring and like the actual Elden Ring characters is like I feel like it's been already mentioned a couple of times, but I want to run through some of the ones that I've like very obviously can tell. Like the classic one is Godwyn being Balder.
Balder.
Yeah, with like the mistletoe actual on. So if you look at the black knives, some of them look like they do have like mistletoe like effects on them, which is kind of crazy. But also very obviously gets killed to start everything by like a thing that everybody assumed he was unkillable, and then he dies because of like someone else in his like extended family, I guess, quote unquote, pulling a prank. And Ronnie being this like Loki figure or like having connections in that way, right? Obviously, the Hell idea makes a lot of sense, but like her filling in that role of being the Loki, like she got him killed through the Black Knives, like straight up.
Absolutely.
There's like Odin being Marika is a pretty classic one, especially when you consider that her eye is you find her soul seal. I forget which river it is next to. I want to say Shofra.
It's Nokron. Yeah,
It's a
you got it.
Nocturne.
Shifra Waterfall
Shifra, yeah,
Basin.
sorry. And it's like behind a dragonkin, you can find one of her eyes, which obviously Mimir and like Odin. Well, she goes to. Okay, hold on. Odin goes to Mimir's well, gives up an eye to gain knowledge as like a cost. But also on top of that, the other half of it is Odin effectively, well, being hung also gets like it's intended to give him knowledge, right? And crucifying yourself, even if it's not you that did it, I suppose, because it's the other half of you, if you want to take it by that method. She's crucified in the Erd Tree.
Yeah.
And it's to the point that like Marika's stakes are a thing and have been a thing in the game, like world lore-wise, to the point where they are everywhere except like Raya Lucaria. So it's not like this was a thing that's new. This is a thing where like the symbology in the world has been like that since the like an age ago, effectively.
Yeah.
Which is
You it's sort of nuts. I mean, not to cut you off, I'm sorry. It's
no,
just
go
like
ahead.
like I love that part of the lore because like you say, this symbolism of America being crucified on within the Erde Tree, that predated the Shattering. From what we can tell of how the practice is spread through the lands between, and also from what we can tell of like the Erde Tree seals. It's almost as if her position as the vessel of the Elden Ring necessitates that position, at least for limited amounts of time. That's sort of like it's just really interesting to me to view it that way. Um, but the other, and in my opinion, more nuts side of it is that the stake of America is used for rebirth. So not only is this image of America as being crucified upon the Elden Ring an important symbol to the citizens of the lands between in terms of recognizing their god, but it's a symbol of eventual rebirth. They crucify themselves with the expectation of being reborn, and Marika has the expectation of going on to be a husk. And like it keeps getting more nuts because, in my opinion, this latter part is based off of the presumption that Marika is the Glomite Queen. Because if you look at Damanula, where there is a Godskin Apostle, the Godskin Apostle has some sort of key knowledge about Marika that it imparts to Damanula, and they use that knowledge to forego the practice of crucifixion so that they can instead recognize Marika's sacrifice with wreaths. They don't wish for her resurrection because she knows that she's like a suicidal nihilist that has fragmented into a husk of a being after having her personality torn apart by God. Like, bad vibes, rough times.
And just realized. So, firstly, Odin, when he hangs himself, it's off if I remember correctly, it's off the branches of Yggdrasil, which Yggdrasil being the Erd Tree just makes way too much sense. But secondly, the entire point of that as a practice is to bring yourself to the verge of death and then come back, right?
Yep.
Which is just straight up the crucifixion on the stakes of Marika. Like, it is just that. And that's crazy. And like the idea of her being the Glowmite Queen. This is another thing I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and I might like at some point make a video on this, but I want to talk about this specifically because I feel the need now to gush about the music in the game because it's fantastic. So Malekith's The Beast Clergyman OST song, Malekith's song
sad.
is so sad, but it also just follows the path of Malekith as a servant of Marika. Because firstly, like the ups and downs of it, like I feel like they make enough sense that it could very easily be that pathway. But secondly, there's masculine voices and there's feminine voices. And the feminine voices, they rise and fall in a way that at the beginning it's like him with the Glowmite Queen, dealing with the Glowmite Queen and everything like that. Whether it is Marika or not is up to interpretation. Because the two versions of this interpretation kind of come down to either Marika's the Glowmite Queen and the song from her point of view is her like actively telling him what to do, and as she rises with her voice and falls with her voice, that's just like him being told how to do and when to fight, and then his voice as the masculine voices respond to the call and crescendo into then therefore it is your will and I will go do it, right? And it kind of like rises and falls through the first half, and then you get to the second half, and obviously it becomes fully like this is the final battle for Malekith, right? And he begins to fight like it is his final battle, and you see the true version of himself. Obviously, he's still fragmented, much like the Elden Ring is, and much like the Rune of Death is. But that whole idea of the rise and fall between the two of them, and then the eventual betrayal in between, and now you come to like the second half of the song, which is the current moment of her influence is still there, seeping through him, telling him he needs to fight this because he is the last stop before whoever needs to get through to, burn the Erd Tree, right? And he's still there, the loyal shadow, the loyal dog of Marika, or the Glowmite Queen, or both, effectively, doing what he needs to do to defend it, giving up his life for it.
Yeah, that's tragic. I love that. I love that speculation into the music because, like, I I am very much a literary person. I write for the reason that I am bad at drawing and bad at making music. And one of those aspects of being bad at music is that I didn't even realize that there was a woman and a male singer in that song. I just heard trembling vocals going up and down, and I was like, ooh, pretty. And that's the extent of my brain's ability to analyze the song. But
I have been obsessed with like that particular song on and off for the entire time since I played Elden Ring the first time. And I understand, like I know lots of different people have like differing opinions on what their favorite songs are, and I really love Melania's and Moog's also, and then also the final battle. There's a lot of music in this game I love, but Malekith's was the moment where I really felt for the game properly, like the first time, effectively. Because on that same day that I played it, played and fought Malekith, if I remember correctly, I think it was either the day of that or the day after it. I did, I kind of like did the cheaty thing of searching stuff up because I wanted to do like people's things, like people's quests and everything. I completed Millicent's quest and I completed Raya's quest on the same day. And then I fought Malekith. And it goes from Raya's quest being absolutely just so depressing in a lot of ways, but having some hope. Millicent's quest being the only way that you can actually save her from this future is to let her do what she wants to do and let her die.
Who is this?
And then the Malekith of listening to that music and then fighting what is effectively just, I don't know, it's just so, it was such an emotionally charged night. And I just remember like staying up after that at like 4 a.m, just being like lying on my bed being like, if I could cry right now I would, staying up for another hour, bawling my eyes out for like 15 minutes and then passing out.
oh man, that I get how that feeling can go, you know? Like it's I'm glad that you could resonate with the story that well. You know, it's memorable.
Ugh, I love this game so much. So continuing on the trend of the OSTs and stuff. I understand you say like you're not particularly too like into that side, but I still would like to know which OST songs do you like resonate with most? Which ones do you enjoy the most? And are there any that you're just like I like dislike this actually?
Okay, I feel like you're leading me with that because I think we've talked about it before, and I mentioned how I wasn't a huge fan of Millennia's second phase OST. If you remember that conversation at all, but we'll save that for the end because
Okay.
like generally I like more chill soundtracks. So like chill music's my entire vibe, and I've always been a big fan of the chiller Dark Souls tracks. Like in the older games, like a lot of the like outro credit songs, or the character creation, or the title themes, or the Firelink Shrine and Majula themes would be my favorite instead of the bombastic boss tones. Even if I really, really liked them. I know, I'm a bit of a disappointing. You see, I actually I know, okay, so Human Justice here just said in chat, Gideon, why? That's so true. I like the first phase of Melania. I think it has like a very cool and somber vibe that sets her up as like the greatest duelist of the Golden Order. But I also really don't like noise. So the beginning of Melania's second phase is all about having this idea that the overwhelming noise of the orchestra swelling to a high volume is symbolic of the overwhelming terror that one experiences when they encounter Melania's rot, which is awesome storytelling. And after the first minute, I think the song's pretty good. I've listened to it while writing, reading, and whatnot, but that first minute, I just don't like. It's just bleh.
That's
Not my
very
subjective
fair.
taste.
I wholeheartedly disagree. The main reason I disagree is that like feeling of chaos when you first have to deal with Melania Phase 2 is just infinitely more with the music there. And I say this because I've fought her during a randomizer where obviously it was pretty crazy, right? But the second phase, just without the music, it's still scary, but it doesn't feel anywhere near as scary without that frantic orchestra, the panic of going, oh my god, I got to phase 2, there's a phase 2, oh no, and then going, oh my god, there's all of these rot Valkyries getting thrown at me, run, and it's a very different feeling, firstly, but also this whole the whole feeling of not just like, oh yeah, it's the rot and the chaos of the rot and the fear you feel when you deal with the rot. It also feels like a peeling back into Melania's mind of, you have that first phase of her going, I'm here to I'm Melania, Blade of Mikola. I will defend Mikola to my very end, but I'm also the greatest duelist in all of the land. Come fight me, let's go. Especially considering the first time you fight her, she just instant kills you unless you're very prepared. But like that first phase is a lot more chill because she's obviously a lot more chill. And even if she's like, oh, I've just woken up and I have to deal with this person, I'm the greatest swordsman in the land, I've got this. And then she gets pushed to the point of, I can't do it. I cannot defend Mikola. I have nothing left here. There's only, all that is left now is to do the exact same thing that I did during my battle with Radahn. I need, like, giving myself over to the god of rot. I'm giving myself over to the rot itself for one last chance to defend the one person in all of the world that I care enough about to do this. And then she does, and it's like that feeling in like any like piece of media where you have a character that transforms and only has like a limited amount of time to do so before they just die. That's the same feeling of, I have such limited time, this person needs to die, because if they don't, then Mikola is lost. And obviously the like actual storytelling of it when she kills you is that, oh, you just reset and then you come fight her again and you get to see the phase 1 and everything again. But from like a narrative standpoint, in a world where the Tarnish fights her and she goes into phase 2 and kills you, my own like headcanon for that is, she kills you, the rot consumes you, and then the rot consumes her and she dies. Or even if she doesn't die, she's left in the middle of that stagnant pool with nothing left. Because she has given not only just her everything, she's gone above and beyond and given herself over entirely to another being that she has no control over. She's been warding away her entire life. and failing to do so. It's also like it brings up those emotions of I'm a big D&D player, and on top of that, Gideon is my DM on Fridays. It's fantastic. And
Heyo.
it's fantastic. My favorite class in D&D is the Warlock. Because of those patron interactions, the connections between that, but most importantly, those moments where you get to do that, like Anakin Skywalker, I will do whatever you ask, just save Padme, and you are able to just give yourself over entirely to another force because you have nothing left, and that's it. Oh, it's perfection. And that's what it evokes in me, that second phase.
Yes, it is a beautiful implementation of the song. Like, I feel like when you listen to video game music or movie music, there's how the song exists in the game, which is top tier. Like, almost all of Elden Ring's tracks are top tier within how they're presented in the game because they have how you talked about, so much narrative in their story. Like, each fight has so much narrative in the music. But then there's also, like, how do I judge this from a video game track perspective? And like that's like, you give it the benefit of the doubt, and then it's just how do I judge this as music? And like, even it's just music, Elden Ring music is phenomenal. And I have that to say, and then, like, if you have a response to it, I totally want to hear it. But I'm not gonna lie, you getting into Millennia's nature with the Scarlet Rot and her choice to embrace it during the second phase, that sparked so many ideas that go back to the whole, like, Golden Order and the Scarlet Rot are inherently antithetical forces, which is like, if we want to get into that, there's so much discussion to be had.
We'll get into that in a second. I purely just want to say and put this on the record for anybody who's watching this now or after the fact, Elden Ring's music is fantastic. And I know that there are lots and lots of people out there who enjoy Dark Souls music more. And I know that there's a lot of people who have said it to me over the internet and to my face that Dark Souls music is better than Elden Ring's music. Subjectively, you are welcome to your opinion. In my opinion, you're boring. But really, like, all of these games have such fantastic use of music and have fantastic, like, just the music by themselves is fantastic. But their connection to the, like, actual narrative of the game, Ludo narrative or some such, the connection to those, like, how the game plays out, like, firstly, like, as a game, and then also how the game narratively exists is, I don't think that there is a game that does it better, except in my opinion, maybe Signalis. But that's, like, maybe. And I say that, again, having, like, both of these games between Signalis and Elden Ring, not only have I been obsessed with the music and listened to it far too much, I've made D&D encounters as a DM based on those things. I have been inspired to the point where those things are, like, have become interwoven in my own creative nature and my creative, like, what I want to create in the world. That's insane. And someone in the chat, Kikru, has just said Final Fantasy soundtracks. I hate to break it to you. I've never played a Final Fantasy game. And I probably won't anytime soon. I apologize. But, so, back to the Golden Order and Rot. What was your thought on that?
Okay, so, it's interesting, because when I first went through the game and, like, made my sort of ideas of the lore, obviously, Rot is not... Oh, yeah, I know. Kikru, I can say that I've personally played the 2 GBA remakes of Final Fantasy 1 and 2, and the remake of 7, so I'm a bit of a big gamer right here. It also does have it's got a very good soundtrack, in my opinion. But yeah, that's a tangent for the chat. We love you, thanks for tuning in, and for supporting trans rights. Yes, all the kisses from Rage. That's gonna be like the stretch goal if you guys get it far.
Exactly.
But yeah, with the Rot, it's like, when I first played it, there's like a tacit acceptance that rot is not bad, because obviously anyone that's played previous games knows that rot is a symptom of entropy, and entropy is a part of life, and if you remove the death and the pain of life from existence, then you remove life itself. Which is something that I knew intellectually was in Elden Ring. But when you play through the story, I think it's so easy to get narratively wrapped up in the Golden Order's viewpoint of the Scarlet Rot and how it interacts with the Golden Order's immortality, and how we see that through Millicent. Because what we see in Millicent's questline is this very tragic manipulation of a character who has her innocence manipulated to go to her death, you know? Which is very dark, very sad. Gowry is without a doubt a villain in that context from that lens. But what I think is interesting is that, like what I was talking about before, the Scarlet Rot is a part of life. And the Rot Lords of the prehistory that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, they understood that, and they made up the lords of the Ulian society that built the Grand Cloister during the prehistory. And in my opinion, the Ulian society was subservient to Farum Azula, which was the royal city. I don't think Farum Azula had any sort of feudalism structure like the Golden Order does. There weren't any feudal dues, no lords, like allegiance or vassalage, but there was the acceptance of the Dragon Lord Placidusax as their lord above them. And what's important about this is that in Farum Azula, there is a very critical importance to death. We see those statues of the bipedal beast clergymen that have the rune of death arc upon them. And we see the Godskin duo, even though that they probably came there after the fact, after Farum's fall. And we see, we fight Malekith there. But we also see a very frequent mural of a twin bird, which is obviously a connection to the Deathbirds. And in my opinion, the twin bird it's an envoy of an unknown other god. In my opinion, that's the god of death. That's got a lot of baggage to it. So I won't leg this down by explaining it. But something I've seen in Quaileg's analysis of the game, Quaileg being another YouTuber, is that there's this idea of that twin bird mural, and the twin birds are looking up at a lotus petal in between them. And if we want to connect that to the Ulian society's connection to Farum, it could be that the understanding of death as a vital part of life during the prehistory came with the idea that death came through rot. And if we look at the poison armament incantation we buy from Gowry, who is a revival of this ideology under the Golden Order structure, we see that he understands the idea of death from life. And I think a human justiciar mentioned earlier in the chat that the ancestral followers, obviously they have these same ideas. And the poison armament is a very specific link to the ancestral followers. It's a link between the spiritualism side of things and the rot side of things. The tangible physicalism side and the intangible idealism side of things. And in my opinion, the ancestral followers weren't something that existed during the prehistory, hence the following part of it. They follow the ways of the ancestors, those ancestors being the Ulian society, which is why they live in their ruins.
Makes a lot of sense.
I could continue, but do you have anything you'd like to add? Because obviously I haven't gotten to Millennia yet. I'm just putting like the pretext of the rot.
So the only thing I want to really add is mentioning that lotus and lotus in Hindu and just Indian mythologies. I say Indian because several different mythologies exist in India, and a lot of them have somewhat different opinions on things. But like Hindu and Buddhist things kind of converge on the one point with the lotus. Like they have different outputs of what they think is stuff, but the lotus is very firmly in this place of the connection between life and death, because the lotus flowers exist in ponds for the most part, floating on the top or in other different ways, but they kind of symbolize this idea of rotting stagnant water still giving life, right? And the lotus themselves, they like grow, and they take the like rotting stagnant water and turn it into actual like life by growing themselves, but also they give life in the way that people do eat, like they eat lotus flowers and they eat like the lotus in general, right? And so like this connection of like life and death being intertwined in this one like symbol, obviously, as we mentioned, like them looking at the lotus flower as like a first point, but also then, as I'm sure you're going to come to, Melania like sprouting into an Ionian lotus flower effectively. It has this like beautiful little like through line in the first place. But I also just wanted to talk about how it is this whole idea of rot in nature in life in general and death in nature in life in general. Both of these things are not at least in my opinion, and I think like just a general thing from like looking at nature and understanding like the actuality behind it. They're obviously very natural things. They're very important things. And just like as an example, there was a whole era of the earth where we had tree-like things. I don't even know if they were necessarily actual trees, but they were tree-like plants that grew to the point where they would die, fall over, and then the bacteria and fungus and all of that stuff that would naturally decay them hadn't evolved yet, so they just fell over and they just stayed there. And that's how we get like fossil fuels today, because they were just kind of crushed under the weight of each other, and then they just turned into like carbons. Like the carbon remained and got crushed by itself to become the fossil fuels that we use.
That's another donation for mermaids.
Ashenum and Co.
I never knew
donated
that about the
$30
formation
via
of fossil
Streamlabs
fuels. That's
charity.
interesting.
Whoop
With
off
like the
with the
whole
beer.
biosphere
Proud of
degradation.
you.
That's cool.
It is cool, and somebody else has just donated to make it 100 at this point. So for those of you who are watching this later, that means my beard is disappearing. Yay! I will get to that after the podcast. But just death in general, I think it is one of those things where it's so feared by everybody. Like even myself at this point, like a lot of people have this like mentality of I'm not scared of death. I'll do whatever, I'll go crazy. But it's like such a natural thing to be afraid of death and to not want to be near death and to not want to lose the people around you. But at the same time, it is a part of life, and it is quite literally the only way we were able to exist in the way we are today. In order for us to have made it to this point, in order for us to evolved into this, like the creatures, the humans that we are today, hundreds upon millions of things have died. And I'm not advocating for death or like anything like that. I'm just saying that life and death are part of this cycle, along with the rot that brings it back into allowing life to be a thing. That it's so easy to vilify all of those things that aren't explicitly life in the way that we look at and enjoy. But in reality, those things are so unbelievably important in the world that we live in today. And not just that, in the philosophy of existence, even.
Yes. Man, Rage, I love this conversation so much because you basically completed what I was going to say from the emotional point of view in your explanation, because we've both played the same game. We both understood the same emotional concepts it was trying to teach us. And just because I'm coming at it with like fucking philosophy major stuff where I'm talking about Epicurus and the ideas of Buddhist philosophy and how the lotus represents rising above the stagnant waters, which you mentioned, but like, no, it's all about the fear of death, the vilification of death. It has to be accepted. That's the entire emotional through line of the Scarlet Rot, and like, I am so happy that you were able to just like completely go through all of that on your own. Like, I love this game.
I love this game so much as well. And I like the fact that I effectively just sniped what you're going to say is actually so funny, firstly. But secondly, it really like just proves again that this game is just fantastic in the way that it like tells its story. Because not only like from a philosophical point of view could we explain it, from an emotional point of view I tried to my best to explain it, but also just from a scientific point of view, trying to explain it, it goes the same way. This like everything works to the same point. And I think the part about that I find so crazy is then just how like looking at the game and the people who've played it, all it takes is you to stop for a second and consider the Golden Order and go, hey, maybe what the Golden Order are doing, especially considering the fact we fucking kill their leaders at the end of the game. Hey, maybe the Golden Order and what they're doing isn't like the best. Maybe we should like pause and just think about what their like thoughts are and consider them for ourselves, right? And like understand the nature of the world itself and why like this isn't like maybe the best idea. It takes just that much to go, hey, okay, you know what? They're not necessarily right about a lot of things, and there's so much more to this that I need to go into. But the sad part about it,
like,
the sad part about it is that I know of so many people who stopped before they got past that part with the Golden Order. They just accepted what the Golden Order told them without any like thought behind it. And that's crazy to me.
yeah, but like it's crazy and it's sad, but it's brilliant.
It
Okay,
is.
like because like I will say From Software is so good because they write these games with the nuance that I hate to say it, that justifies the Golden Order. Like the Golden Order is terrible. It's a product, but it's a product of strength. Like the core idea of the Erde Tree, of the Crucible, is that the untamed fires of life will stoke and then dim, and then stoke and then dim, and that they'll build up and that they must be controlled. The frenzied flame must be tamed or restrained, and that takes a lord that has true strength. That's why the mark of a true lord is strength, because the representation of the physical of the crucible, of the Erde Tree, of the fires of life, is the representation of the wills of human existence, of civilization going against you.
Yeah.
You know, like, so it's like not only is the Golden Order a product of existence in the same way that feudalism and human civilization is the product of human life, but it's also that, like, you know, Freaker Eyes in the chat a little bit ago when we were talking about the acceptance of death mentioned the Dark Souls 3 quote, "Fear not the dark, my friend, and let the feast begin." But that's a quote that comes from these rotten insect people at the Ringed City of Dark Souls 3. And the entire concept of the Ringed City is that it was built by the pygmy lords who sold out to Lord Gwyn because they feared the dark. That's why the insect people preach to not fear it, to accept it, because it's been restrained from Lord Gwyn's tampering for so long. I like how I'm calling him Lord Gwyn. What the fuck is up with that? But like it's been restrained for so long that the world itself is rotting. So in Dark Souls 3, and that sort of colored my interpretation of Elden Ring's rot, because in Dark Souls 3, that's like one of the few games where rot is unequivocally bad, where it's used in its thematic ideas of distortion more so than it's used in its thematic ideas of the natural part of the end of life. But then at the same time, part of the acceptance of the rot with the Ring the City is with the idea that you can complete the Ring the City and take the blood of the Dark Soul and renew existence. So even then, even in Dark Souls' very bleak telling of it, rot is still good in a way. God, that was okay. Tangents, my bad. But where
actually, I feel like I want to interject just for a second here in the idea that like rot between the games is functionally still the same thing, right? Because in the way that we understand it, rot is just an unthinking, unfeeling, something needs to end and I need to return it to nutrients to give back, right, to life. It is that like final point between life and death where it, like death has already occurred and you need to go back to being allowed to be used for life. And like in Dark Souls, 1 and 3, then this idea of those two different versions of it, that they're still the same thing in the way that the rot itself is just doing what it is meant to be doing, but it's because that death hasn't been allowed to do what it needs to do that it's such a terrifying and unbelievable force, effectively, because it does have to
Yes.
simply come down to the idea
Yeah.
that, like, if you don't let the cycle do what it needs to do, and you keep stacking life to the point where it keeps going on and on and on, eventually you will get to the point where all you have is life, and then something, like, the natural order is going to make something break because it can't sustain itself. Like, very specifically, just as an idea, in rainforests, if you grow enough stuff in the rainforest for too long and then cut it all down and try and regrow on that land without returning that nutrients to the soil, rainforest soil, because of its nature and because of the, like, climate that it's in and the plants that grow upon it, they are doing their best. They're fighting and, like, dying to get as enough nutrients as possible. And if you take all of those nutrients out of the cycle, rainforest soil goes to shit. It literally, like, just as an example, one of the main reasons people tend to do it is to, like, grow beef effectively. Like, well, grow beef, cows, graze cows on the land, on, like, grassland and stuff there. And it takes, like, a very short period of time before the land becomes unbelievably barren and useless to them, because even the grass can't fucking grow there because there's not enough nutrients. It is purely just a case of, if you don't allow rot to take its course and return stuff to the land, the land is not going to be able to sustain life. And that is what it feels like Dark Souls is effectively saying. It also is then saying that eventually, if life keeps going, the rot's going to do what it's going to do no matter what. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're Lord Gwyn. It doesn't care if you're one of the ancient dragons. It doesn't care if you are Melania, Blade of Mikola. If it is your time to rot, you will rot.
Yeah, no, that is incredibly on point. Completely, I think, is very relatable to Elden Ring as well as all of the other games. It's completely, I completely agree with that. Even if I were to jump to the end point of some of my thoughts, it's that, like you say, the rot is okay in the cycle that it builds for itself. But as soon as you add an outside factor into it, like humans destroying more of the rainforest than is usually destroyed, you have this upending of the natural cycle that results in the possible destruction of all of the intricate little nuances of the biosphere that were previously going on. And it's like, with the Golden Order, they bound the death because they feared it. And in binding death, they destroyed the nuance of the rot that comes at the end of life. And because of that, the rot in the Golden Order is horrifying, like you said. Like, under the prehistory, when the rot comes for you, you die or you integrate with it by having mushrooms grow on you. But under the Golden Order, when the rot comes for you, it just tears apart your insides until you die, and you can't evolve into a rot lord or anything else because you're just reborn, and then you die again, and then you're reborn, and then you die again, and then you're reborn. Because, like, I don't know. The way the Golden Order seems to me is that either you're reborn as yourself when you die through the guidance of grace, like the Tarnished player is during the game, but that seems like more of something that has happened with the shards of the Elden Ring guiding the players in life to rebinding themselves, in the same way that undeath only occurs in the Dark Souls trilogy during the times that the fire grows low. With the natural order of things more likely being that you return to the Erd Tree, where if the Erd Tree is the crucible, the source of all primal life that all life once came from, then it sort of implies that there's a max amount of life, in a way, and that it can become strained or overgrown. Like, if there's too much immortal life, it doesn't leave room for new life. If the garden is overgrown, there's no room for new growth. If the rainforest is overgrown, you know. So it's like, I don't know where I was going with that. Oh my goodness! You see, this is what happens to me after I get into discussions for a while. My apologies.
I don't think you even needed to know where you were going with it. Even actually, I feel like that by itself was very profound, to be honest. And it kind of almost brings me to the like another thought of like the redwoods and how their natural cycle, instead of rot specifically, is wildfire. Um, and like the idea of like the Erd tree burning and then like life coming in back in a different way after the fact is just a first thought. But with the redwoods, they their seeds don't like have a resin over it. That means that once they burn, like the actual redwood trees burn, then so do the seeds enough that they can actually grow. And it is like life itself is saying, hey, like we know that we can't compete with our parents, right? But we also understand that life and nature and the existence of the world has a failsafe effectively in place to make sure that new life can still occur even when the forest is overpopulated, right? And whereas in other places like the rainforest and most forests and this, that, and the other, and Elden Ring to some extent, their like failsafe is rot. In the redwoods, it's fire. It is that cleansing flame that burns away everything and then leaves space and nutrients again for the like redwoods to then regrow. And I think like the fact that not only does Elden Ring have the rot, it also has so many sources of scouring flame that bring death and then bring like new life from it later in one way or another, right? And then also just the idea of like fire itself, even in Dark Souls, has been always this idea of it keeps away the darkness, it keeps life going. It is our like most natural cause to want to be near to fire because of how we've evolved around it, but at the same time it is this terrifying force in its own like way, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I mean, Dark Souls is all about that, and the lingering aspects of it are still with the flame monks. Like, love the flame, obsess over the flame, but don't touch it because the flame will burn you, so fear the flame. Um, I think that it's really interesting, your anecdote with the redwoods, because I went hiking in Montana, which is a US state for you foreigners. The year before Elden Ring came
I'm
out,
offended.
and um, and yeah, it's there had actually been a forest fire in the park I went through, and the trees there grew from the basis of that same seed dynamic that you had described. And it's really interesting because I definitely had the idea that the Erde tree was sort of inspired from that. And I like how you call attention to the distinction of these views on life, which I think is very important. Like, I think that the fact that the rot as a philosophy can exist alongside the Golden Order, which I briefly mentioned that I believed that they were Epicureanists, which Epicureanism is just the fear of death and the fear of pain and the embracing of hedonism with temperance, indulge in yourself because this is the only life you have, and reject pain because what's the point in it? Like, Stoicism preaches that you accept the fate of the universe because that's the will of the universe and that's how it is. But why should you accept pain? I mean, that's honestly, in my opinion, a very good question. Like, it's fun to talk about that from a conceptual point of view and how we read it, but like I do like it's funny. Kagika, I
Kage
butchered
Iga.
that.
Yes, Kage.
Thank you. Okay, Kage. Yeah. So Kage said, "Is Gideon a Golden Order apologist?" The Golden Order sucks, but America doesn't, in my opinion. I'm America apologist. I'm also, to a lesser extent, a Gwyn apologist, but Gwyn sort of had it coming in a much more tangible way. But it's like, I say that because America embodies the microcosm of the Golden Order insofar as she's built the Golden Order on the basis of binding death and giving the people that she rules abundant blessings. She has removed death from their lives and pain from their lives so that they can live in her eternal garden of life. That didn't go exactly the plan. When the Omen started being born, her previously tolerant culture started, baby killing. So obviously things got out of hand quickly. And coming from the American guy, oh my god. I know. I mean, look, I'm neutral evil according to D&D alignment tests, if that helps.
I think I was neutral, which is wild.
But yeah, it's I'm a big fan of Dune as a book series. Again, mentioning Dune, I think it's way too in my opinion, Dune is one of the best analytical breakdowns through fiction of structure, like institutional structures and how they are required and produced by human society and why they're fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Paul Atreides never wanted to be the god emperor of humankind, but then he killed 47 billion people and unleashed a horde of jihading people across the entire known universe.
Yeah.
It's rough. But is Paul a villain? That's rough, buddy. Paul is as much of a villain as Marika is. They both did terrible things and enabled terrible power structures, but I think one of the big concepts of everything is that you have to embrace structure. At least we mentioned that I'm an American, and it's one of the biggest things that I relate to as a leftist is that the only way we're going to change anything is through winning elections. If you don't think that winning elections will work, then you have to plan for the Second American Civil War, because that's the only other option. It's revolution and civil war, or it's elections. You embrace the institution or you destroy it. But that's why I like the idea of how the Golden Order is presented. How the fear of death is presented as a good thing under the hereditary blessings, but you see how the rejection of death as a mindset is destructive. And I know I'm going really far, but just I want to finish it out because I had this really profound friend with I've got a good friend that's a Buddhist monk, and I had this really profound conversation one time with him about the nature of wisdom that is learned from spiritual prophets. And it's one thing that what we talked about how a lot of when you look into religions, a lot of the basis of their understanding is this wisdom of the metaphysical that's sort of a metaphor for life, even if they come to different metaphors based off of different cultural contexts. Yeah, I've got weird friends, freaker eyes. They said in the chat, damn, what kind of friends do you have?
The best kind of friends.
But it was just interesting because it's we went from there to talking about how Jesus and Catholic and Christian priests, I don't know why I started with Catholic, that's just my upbringing coming out.
Yeah.
How Christians related to Buddhists, how at the core of Jesus's teachings is this idea of tolerance and acceptance and all of that. But where they differ is that Buddhism sees the material as something you accept. The pain is a part of yourself, and through accepting that pain, you rise above it and you achieve wisdom. But the Christian point of view rejects that, because what they believe is that their soul is divine, but their material body is imperfect, which is very, 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 very relatable to the Golden Order with its concept of the crucible and the frenzied flame being imperfect, but the greater will is perfect. And through the greater will imprisoning the frenzied flame, dividing the crucible into the hereditary flame, it made it perfect, but it didn't. It didn't make it perfect. It's it's the greater will is closer to the demiurge than it is to the actual Christian God. With the idea that the demiurge, the demiurge, yeah, we love getting into theurgy. And yeah, I think that nuance is so important. Although also I love being a fan of the frenzied flame ending. Like, fuck it, burn it down. We've all been there.
Oh, I'm surrounded by frenzied flame enjoyers now. Oh my god. All of that is just like so profound. And there's one very specific section of that I really want to home in on. And that's the conversation about like pain and rejecting it, right? I don't necessarily agree that like the rejection of pain is the best idea, and I say that in a way of you shouldn't accept more pain and put upon you. But the truth of life is that eventually you will have to experience pain. It's not be afraid of pain. Be prepared to some extent and accept the fact that it is going to happen, right? And I say this in a way of like, pain is pain, and I'm gonna like reframe pain as like grief and like that sort of emotional side of it rather than like physical pain a little bit more, because I mean there's a certain amount of physical pain that you need to experience, like you will experience in life is pain, you know, as it is, but like there's a lot of things you can do physically that are a lot in this day and age that make life a lot better and easier to deal with, that you should just do if you can. And like expecting it is like true, but also deal with that. Like emotional pain, I think, is a lot more like the mind and the body, right? Like a pain upon your mind is a different type of pain, right? It's not the kind that like can like fade as easily, right? It's not necessarily as easily cured effectively, but it is a thing that like everyone will experience. And I do think to some extent that is like it's important, but it's not a case of, oh, you should go seek it out, or oh, you should like be okay if you are experiencing this kind of pain from like a specific source. Like, no, fight it. You don't deserve to be stuck in the shit, but that doesn't mean like you're going to be able to get through life without it, right? And the reason I wanted to
Yeah.
like talk about this is from the reverse point of view, having that framing of the world of like life is going to throw pain at me, but I'm not going to be able to like I shouldn't just accept
Did you cut
it.
out?
Oh, did I cut
Or
out? Yeah. Hello.
you said life is going to throw pain at me, and then I didn't
Okay.
hear
Sorry.
anything else. I
li-
apologize if you didn't cut out though.
Can you hear me now? All good. Gideon? Oh no. I'm just gonna continue talking and hope that Gideon.
I guess I'll. Is anyone in the chat not hearing Rage either?
I think they
Also,
should be able to
Kikru,
hear
I'm
me.
reading through your message. I'll read it in the space between Rage. Because I do think that's a very profound thing that you've said, Kikru. You hear Rage? Fuck. It's really odd. I don't. You think it's just Discord? I'm gonna hang up the call and go rejoin that.
Okie dokie. We'll be back in 1 second. But while that's happening, I'm just gonna continue that thought of pain itself. Like, hello, have you returned?
I have returned. Hello.
Yay!
Go on.
Technical difficulties. We're all good. This was bound to happen. That's how it is. Pain, like, is a thing that you should reject but expect to some extent, but also knowing that it is a thing that exists in the world and it is just a natural order of life to some extent. I feel I feel like it's very important for everybody who can and is able to do so to recognize that. Don't internalize that. Like, work your way through it. Continue with your life. Be the best person you can. But I mean that in the way of, please, there is so much pain in the world already. There are so many people who are hurting because of their, like, the way that they have existed in the world and the world like reacting to it, the social structure being built to hurt them, the social structure being built to make them cause harm. And there's a whole like conversation I could very easily have here about masculinity and how like fragile and toxic it is as a concept currently, but there is like a true good, like there is a masculinity, a version of it that people can strive to become that is masculine and is good and protects the people around you, but at the same time doesn't hurt people for existing. And that is the fact that is the nature of like masculinity in nature, right? Like, but the truth is that like the world is, it currently is in a way that life itself and the social structures around us, it gets to a point where people hurt each other, whether intentional or not. And I put this out to everybody who's listening. If just take a second and think about how people around you could already be hurting. And when you're like, let's say, playing that video game that you're playing online, or when you're about to get angry at someone for some reason, or when you're watching someone else get angry at you for some reason, pause and think and listen, because it's not worth hurting someone else for the sake of, for effectively no reason, to perpetuate the structures that have come before. Because every single person on this planet deserves to be alive and deserves to be able to express the person they are if they're not hurting anyone. And I categorically cannot sit here and be comfortable around the concept that people are out there just like, I'm going to cause pain because someone else caused pain to me, or I'm going to cause pain because the world sucks, or there's no point in caring about anything because everything sucks. Because realistically, and this is like, this gets a bit further into my philosophy of life, where if nothing does matter, then the things that matter are only the things that you care about, right? And so you should care about things because then they matter. And because of that, on top of everything that I've just said, you should be kind and caring and take a second to listen and think and understand the people around you, because you are all beautiful, wonderful, brilliant people. And so are all of the people around you. And you can be a force for good in the world, even if it's small things.
Yeah, like pain is a perpetuated cycle. Let it end with you and try to make the world a better place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
So, yeah, sorry, continue.
Oh, I just had a couple of ideas about the whole nature of pain and embracing it or denying it.
Mhm.
But I do know that we're 6 minutes away from your time slotted end of the episode, so I
Mhm.
don't know if I have time to fully get into them.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna say that we should leave that for the Elden King the Elden Kings podcast, which we are going to be recording tomorrow on stream, also from 6 BST to 8 BST. And we're going to get into this. We're going to go back to Stoicism in Elden Ring, hopefully. And we're going to talk about a bunch of other stuff. But just to leave us on like a slightly different, brighter note, I know that you have recently got into Signalis, and Signalis is one of my favorite games of all time at this point. Dusk got me into it, and it was just fantastic. What are your thoughts so far, and what are you excited to see in it? And I realize this, most of you are like, oh, it's an Elden Ring podcast. No, with Signalis. It's great. Go play it. It was a game made by like functionally 2 people, and it is one of the most like fascinating, beautiful pieces of art I've ever experienced. So go do that. But yes.
Yeah, I am. It gave me a big smile when I heard you ask. That's very nice. Before I explain it, do you mind if I read Kiku's messages from the chat? I just think they're valuable to like the end point of what you were talking about.
Please
And
do.
like I think if we do talk about it, like it's somewhat aligned with my own views, and I think that'd be a good point to pick back up on if we do
100%.
continue the discussion. Okay, yeah, sorry. So yeah, Kiku just said that they think that there's different kinds of pain in some ways of life nowadays, especially when there's so many quick sources of dopamine and short-term happiness. Indulging in it too much can really break someone in the long run. So like, pain is is a tolerance factor to pleasure, is how it sounds. And then maybe it's just me, but honestly, through 10 years of trying to beat my borderline, embracing pain is the only thing that's gotten me to a better place. I think that sort of goes back to my Buddhist analogy to an extent, where it's like pain is a constant part of life. The embracing of it and rising above it is what's necessary. And I think that's also why I feel like a lot of people that struggle with mental illness, not to say that there's not people that a lot of people that struggle with mental illness or chronic illness seem to relate to Gowry and the millennia as the rock goddess side of things, at least from how I've interacted with them. But like, I don't mean to make presumptions, because that's a very broad thing, and there's a lot of mentally ill people playing Elden Ring. And then Ikiku ended with, it's definitely not worth hurting others, of course. However, I do see some value embracing your pain through the form of your hardships, making yourself uncomfortable, be out of your comfort zone, suffer the pain of discipline. Now than the pain of regret later. Like, embrace pain rather than running from it. But yeah, sorry. With that said, Signalis is awesome. Like, holy shit, I didn't know it was made by 2 people until I was literally going through the intro credits before the game, and I was like, yeah, that's 2 people. And then they had, like, 2 composers and some playtesters. That is so cool.
Crazy.
And yeah, and it's like, while I was playing, they have this really, really creative and, how do you call it, optimized use of the assets, like the art assets, in the way that, like, it looks like they're 3D models, so you can rearrange them as you need, and then you can use the way that the game engine is made to switch from isometric to first person, which, like, if the game was first person all the time, that wouldn't hit, because the isometric helps with gamifying it, helps with movement, it helps with just being a more fun game, but it also helps with distribution of information and vibes and whatnot. But where I come from with vibes is that first person is also very useful for that. And it's like, I was playing Signalis, and I was going through like the first portion of the game, and spoilers, but there's this thing that you pick up called the Eternity Plate, and you instantly get this like vision where it's like there's a door with 6 slots, so there's probably 6 plates or something, and it's like you get teleported in your mind to what's probably a memory being unlocked in your robot subconsciousness, where you remember yourself going to a radio station. That, or you're getting tangibly teleported there. Who knows? Maybe it's a metaphor. But at the
All
radio
metaphors.
station, you are in first person, and it's so cool because it's like an inward journey represented through the POV shift, which is awesome. I really love the way that they use the visuals in that game.
100%. I think like the use of the visuals and the use of the music is just some of the best in like gaming, and I say that like as a person who is really not into like I really like I'm not too fussed about like retro games anymore at this point. A lot of those like styles are like cool and interesting to a certain point, but I'd rather have a game that looks like decent, like a lot more like recent to some extent to play rather than like some of the older ones, right? But this game, like, it entrapped me within hours, and I was just playing it constantly to the point where I remember I was like actually really ill. I managed to like somehow get like really sick. I think I'd managed to like contract COVID or something again, to be honest. And I like, so my computer setup is basically at the back of my garden, and this was like winter, and I was just like in my bed, just like aggressively messaging the person who got me into the game, Dusk, just like, I really want to play Signalis right now, but I'm too ill, and my room is too cold, and I know if I go out to the back, I'm gonna be way too cold, and I'm gonna stay ill, and it get worse, and like I say that as a point of like, this game is fantastic, and I'm excited to see you play through it and see what you think of like the story and the connections to all of the things in everything, because I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything, because it's really good. But I think firstly you're going to love it. And I also think that if anybody enjoyed Elden Ring, genuinely, if you enjoyed Elden Ring, or you like survival horror games at all, like, you know, Silent Hills, those kind of games, you are going to like really enjoy this game, I think. And like, it is a case of, this is 2 people who made this, and I genuinely think they deserve the money entirely. Like, if I could, I feel like I would very happily buy like 4 or 5 more copies of this game. Just, it's that good. But we are coming to our allotted time at this point. Just to reiterate, we are going to be streaming also. Well, I'm going to be streaming for the entire, like, for the next 4 days, effectively, not including the day I'm currently streaming this. Timetables will be in a community post if you're watching this on YouTube. And if not, then it's on my Twitter and also my stream if you want to go check back at that, etc. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, same time effectively for the Elden Kings podcast here. And while all of that stuff, I also wanted to just reiterate that all of the donations are going to charity. Of like, please don't donate, and please don't like sub or like donate to me. Otherwise, I don't even think I have my thing up for that. But like, please don't. Please donate to the charity Mermaids. They are fantastic. And I wanted to just finish this up with just another little quick point of saying, you, the person who is listening to this, I think you are fantastic, and I think you are great, and I think you deserve to be the best person you can possibly be, and I hope that you let yourself be that person. On that note, it has been absolutely fantastic to have you, Gideon. I'm going to have to watch this back and just brain blast myself tonight to understand stoicism for tomorrow, but beside, like, everything you have said has been unbelievably just mind-meltingly fantastic, and it has been such an honor to have you on the podcast.
Aw, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. That was an adorable story you shared with Signalis. I'm very happy to have learned that about you, and I had such a fun time. I'm very happy to be contributing to the charity stream, and thank you for letting me join. Yeah, very good.